Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan from Startups.com, joined as ever by my partner, the Startups.com CEO and founder, Wil Schroter. Wil, this is going to be a heavy one, man. Most of what we do here, I feel like, is pretty heavy lifting. We dig into some fairly meaty topics. This is one that is circulating the globe right now at rapid and rampant pace. With good reason. It's time, right? Today we're going to talk about socio-political issues and their place in the workplace. And this is a very loaded topic. Anybody listening will probably know there are going to be some holes in my visibility and Wil's visibility on this as two 40-something-year-old white men. There are perspectives that we certainly don't have. So this is me and Wil opening the door and saying, hey, if you're hearing things that are incongruent with how you see things, or you have perspective that we don't, please let us know. I mean, this is always the case with startup therapy, right? We always want to hear back. We always want to know, what's jiving and what's not. In this case, this could not be more important, right? So, Wil, we're both having a lot of these conversations right now. But as you're talking to founders, how is this coming up? How are people dealing with this? We've seen some cases of late where this has gone really off the rails. And so, I haven't talked to anybody where this has become like a massive internal issue, but everybody's thinking about it, and with good reason. But what are the conversations you're having right now?
Well, in the past couple of weeks when we were recording this, the most recent incident was with Basecamp, and they took a very strong stance with their team to say
Yes.
that there aren't going to be any discussions, around society, politics, pretty much anything,
Yep.
anything that wasn't
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
is no
It's not on the
longer.
meeting agenda. It's not in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
meeting.
it's no longer a
Yeah.
discussion, and they took it off the table unilaterally, and that didn't go well, right?
No.
For a lot
For
of reasons.
obvious reasons. Yep.
But what it did, and I think this is an important part of what we're gonna discuss today, it opened up an important conversation. It got a lot of
Sure
leaders
did.
talking, in our case, got a lot of founders talking who are, leaders in their organizations. And I think at its core, it was, where do you stand on this issue? At its core,
Yeah.
we're looking at um, what is appropriate. What should be a conversation that we have within the workplace, and what we're talking about is public forums, right? Amongst everybody,
Correct.
and what's not, and where do you
Yeah.
draw the line? And for all the folks we've been talking to, and we, across genders, across races, across everything, across different parts of the world, uh, people have strong opinions on it, right?
Yeah.
And the world of Twitter expressed very strong opinions in their response, and I got to tell you, like everything else in life, they were divided. It wasn't
Yeah.
what people, some people who feel strongly about you have to have as much free speech as possible, just assume that was unilaterally accepted. There's a lot of people that didn't feel that way. Basecamp didn't feel
Yeah.
that way. Before them, Coinbase didn't
Obviously.
feel that way. And what I was hoping to do today, I think, what we could talk about is where are those lines? What is acceptable, but more so, how do we talk about it? Because
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's a bit of an assumption from some folks that this has all been figured out. And I got to tell
Right.
you, it has not been figured out,
It has
right?
not been figured out.
These are
Yeah.
not conversations that I've been having amongst other leaders 20 years ago. Should I have? Yes.
Let me
I wish we did.
Yeah, of course. Of course. We'd be so much further along right now that we wouldn't be having this discussion. Let me restate and something that you just said, because I think is super important, and that's that I think people are getting caught up in the actual opinions being expressed, which of course is important, right? When we see polarity, obviously that creates some friction, right?
Right.
I think what you were saying, I think this is really important. It's how we talk about it, right?
Right.
The framework that we use for these conversations is, in my opinion, as important as the opinions themselves, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
how something gets said, where it gets said, in the context, and like you said, like Twitter, yes, of course that'll blow up because that's not a real dialogue. That's not a human dialogue. You're taking a very, very
Unidirectional.
human as a
Yeah.
topic can get, right? And you're boiling it down to these micro character statements where everybody can, all you can do is be polarizing, right?
Right.
Or agree with somebody else's polarity. So the forums for these discussions are super critical. Having proper frameworks and understanding how we talk about these issues is at the core of this, right? We're not trying to change anybody's opinion. I'm not. I don't think you are either, Wil. What
Right.
we're trying to do is say, if you have an opinion, maybe here's a framework for how to think about the expression of that opinion and how it
Right.
will be best received by the people on the other end of the poll, so that you can reach some of that common ground, right? Because at the end of the day, like with most things, we'll find that there is far more commonality than there is derision if you
Right.
can actually open a forum where all of that can be exposed, as opposed to just going, hyper focused on a singular particular point and allowing that to polarize, right? It's just
Right.
human nature to do that, especially when we're arguing. But I think it's really important. The point you made that it's really the how here that's the
Right.
super critical. It's not the what even that we're talking about,
Right.
or the whys, right, or the points of view. It's how we get there.
Right. In everything that we try to unpack in these episodes and really in our own business and our lives, etc., I think what's helped me personally, and Ryan, I'm sure you feel the same way, is we just keep asking why, right? Why is it that
Yep.
way? How did it come to be? How do people feel, et cetera? We ask a lot of questions. And what I
Yep.
didn't see in kind of the aftermath of the Basecamp or the Coinbase, announcements, were people saying why? Like how did it come to
Yep.
that? Why did
Right. How did we
you
get to this
choose?
point?
Right? How do we get to this point? Now, here's where it comes off the rails. People get so polarized and so offended so quickly, right? And so you
Yep.
instantly saw the two camps. You saw one camp that said any kind of change in speech in the workplace is oppression, and you're a horrible person. And then you saw the other
Yep.
side that said the work is for work. Anybody that suggests that it should be anything else is a horrible person.
Yeah.
Immediately polarized. I
Sure.
saw almost no chatter in between that said, "Well, how do we do both?" Right?
Yeah.
How do we give people the tools and the platform that they need, that they deserve, while at the same time not blowing up work? I didn't see any of
Right.
that, and it really
Yeah.
pissed me off because in my mind, that should have been the heart of the conversation, right? That should be what people are talking about is how do we get to these goals, not how do we shut people off, not how do we take this kind of staunch stance. And I could
Yeah.
probably say this about every world issue, but this is about
Right.
startups. And this
Yeah.
is about
Yep.
what we as founders deal with. So, what I'd like to walk through with you today is just a couple areas where this thing starts to fall apart, where founders kind of misstep, where staff kind of missteps, and where we can start
Yep.
to have a more productive conversation so that everybody's like gets to a place they're happier about. And I actually think that place does exist. I don't think this is a Shangri-La, imagine all the people
Right.
kind of moment. I actually think this is a
Yeah.
very productive, way to get there.
Let me kick it off with this then. Let me kick it off with a question. So I absolutely agree, and I think that the types of discussions that are happening, because they begin with one poll, right? It tends to be somebody who like the discussion kicks off with something that's pretty hyperbolic, right? And it's
Right.
it's it's all the way on one side or the other of the issue. And then, in order to create some balance in discussion, the other poll comes in, right? And I
Right.
think a lot of that has to do with the time, the place, and the point at which somebody now feels compelled to finally step up and share their polarizing opinion,
Right.
right? So I think that I can't analogize this down to something quite as simple as passing the ball in soccer, but we always try to have you want the triangle, right? When you just have two poles, right? Everything is kind of obvious and too stark, right? There's too much contrast, and everybody sort of knows where the other person stands, and it just ends up becoming this balancing act and this competition. So we need that third point, right? We need the triangle here. We need to be able to enter at a point where there's room. We're creating space essentially, right? We're creating space in the discussion for everyone who falls somewhere else on the spectrum, right? They're
Right.
neither all the way to one side nor the other. But I think that when the conversations begin purely polar, nobody wants to hear that middle point of view once both the poles have started arguing, right? It just
Right.
becomes like this background noise, right? Everybody's paying attention to what everybody all the way on one side or the other is saying, and there's no middle ground, and there's nobody that wants to occupy that space, right? It's
Right.
easier to chip in if I'm one of the people that feels as strongly as the people on other poll do, but I don't have that entry point. So what's your opinion on this, Will? If these conversations had started earlier and had started with some level of leadership's involvement, how different would they be than sort of letting these happen organically and letting them bubble up to the point where they became? 'Cause I'm going to say that most of the companies we've seen deal with this dealt with it at a point where it had already become some level of toxic within the organization.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think from management's standpoint, so to speak, and I hate doing kind of these two teams pitted against each other, but let's just call it that for a second, just so people can kind of identify with the two characters in this story. From management's perspective, I think the idea was their polarizing position was work is for work, and anything
Yep.
else is a distraction. And look, they're not wrong about distractions prevent work, right?
Sure.
That's I mean straight up, right? It's kind of hard to argue that one.
Yep.
Um, what they were missing though was this concept of if I say work is for work, and that's true, then any
Yep.
policy that I apply toward that is also true. That's where
Yeah.
they messed up, right?
Right. Right.
Those
Right.
arguments aren't necessarily tied together, right? You could say work is for work, work trumps all. So if work and productivity is getting done, then the policies are justified. Not really,
Correct. No.
right? You could say the policy is to work people 100 hours a week. And if productivity is getting done, I don't care about your mental well being. I don't care the
Yep.
effect on your family. I don't care about
It's
your
obviously
health and all
correct
these
because it's
things.
working. Yep.
Totally not true,
Right. Yeah.
right?
The old don't
And yet,
question my methods, only question my results piece, right? Which is not valid.
it never ends well, by the way.
Yep.
Like, yes,
Right.
you'll get the work done. At what cost? Right?
Yeah.
Because focus has a cost. You and I have talked about it incessantly on this podcast, right?
Correct.
And typically as a cost, we really wish we hadn't, had to bear to get the results we wanted
Yep.
to get. Sometimes you have to. I get that. But this is one of those times where we're not making a decision about ourselves, right? Ryan, if you
Correct.
and I want to
Yep.
work 100 hours and you and I decide that's what we want to do, so be it.
Yep.
But the moment we tell other people that
Everybody
they
else to do
have
it.
to bear a
Yep.
cost of focus, right? It's not that simple. And shit gets
Correct.
really complicated at that point. So I think the first point, that I like to kind of dig into is this idea that work is for work, and if anything that distracts from focus is bad. I know on paper that sounds right. What I want to do is I'd like to get your thoughts on where that argument starts to break down a little bit.
Sure. Well, flip it to an issue that we've already kind of dealt with as a society, where we get into like women at the workplace issues, right? So think about things like maternity and paternity leave, right?
Sure.
Is a baby a distraction? Yeah. Do we need to accommodate that distraction within the context of work? Yes, right?
Right.
Having children
Right.
is an important part of a lot of people's lives. And we can't just simply say, yeah, no babies at work, right? I mean,
Right.
by which I mean,
Right.
don't have any of them because I don't
Right.
want you to be distracted from your job
Sure.
for any particular
Sure.
period of time, whether that's maternity or
example.
everything that happens after, because it gets far more complicated, right? That's actually the easy period. You just don't know that as a new parent. So I think that's a decent analog here, and that everybody would go, yeah, that makes sense. Like we could never do that. But we don't have to rewind too many years to where that was the discussion that was on the table, right? These were
Agreed.
issues that we were dealing with and working through, which I think is just another generally important point to this entire discussion. To your point earlier, should we have been talking about this 20 years ago? Yes. Were we? Not enough. And so
Right.
all of this is
Yeah.
quite new for most leadership. I would say almost all leadership. There's varying degrees as to who's practicing it and who's getting it done right and well, like anything, right? But this is going to take time. This is going to take practice. This is a new muscle that we have not been flexing, and it's weak, right? So we're going to need some time to get this right. But I think I would jump off there. I would say that like use a policy like that as the analog, as the metaphor for how we look at, where can we draw lines? In some cases, can we draw lines at all, right? To your point,
Sure.
we can, but they don't really exist. Like if we set the minimum baseline, we draw that line and we say 100 hours, that's the work week. We can do that. Yeah, I can draw that line. Is anybody going to live up to that? A couple people might for a little while, and then everybody's
Sure.
going to burn out, and the whole ship goes down in flames, right? So yes, you can. Do you want to? Probably not. Even if not fundamentally, you don't agree with it. Practically speaking, it's going to have a cost, right? And so I think that's
Right.
what I'll probably keep coming back to, right? It was your refrain to begin with, but I think I'll come back to it as well. What are the costs of these things going to be to your own mental well-being as a founder as you enforce these policies, to the team, and then again, like to their families, their friends, society at large, which we'd like to believe that we're separated from and removed from as a startup company. We're not, right? Our companies exist within society. All of these people exist within society. So these issues will cross the lines into our companies. Again, the question becomes when, how, where do we talk about these things?
You bet. And there's a point where we can say, well, if you don't like it, go work at another company, right? And to be fair,
Sure.
that stance doesn't have a lot of longevity attached to it, right? I mean, frankly, it's a little
Nope.
bit lazy, but beyond that, it allows you to say, I don't want to deal with the issue. I don't want to deal with
Yeah.
what people take home, right? All I want to
Yeah,
deal with is
exactly.
what you have at work. And that sounds wonderfully simple. It's just not realistic, right?
Yeah, no,
To your
if you're
point, Ryan.
running a company built on bots and AI and robots, then
Yeah,
yeah, I
like
mean, maybe
and again,
might work.
where I think this argument breaks isn't the intent. The intent is to say, I just want to get shit done, right?
Yeah,
Like Basecamp said specifically, we just want to get work done, right?
right.
They weren't wrong about that. And honestly, I don't think people disagree with that. That we also want to get work done. That's why you hired us,
No,
right? I don't.
that's right.
And
Yeah,
the implication is that those that are having, they're raising their hand at work saying, "Hey, you're taking out my voice," are tantamount to saying, "I don't want to work." I don't think that's true, right?
no,
And
it's not
again, there are broken assumptions on both sides of this discussion.
correct.
So the broken assumption on the leadership side is that if it drives focus, then it trumps all. And it just
Yep,
that doesn't hold up.
it
I don't
doesn't.
think you can blanket policy that.
Well, I think if you flip that just a little bit and you say that, look, some of these issues are directly impacting people's focus. They're impacting people differently, right? So
Sure.
systematic oppression isn't something that I was on the wrong end of, right? So it doesn't change my focus in the way that it does for somebody who was in a system where they were systematically oppressed, right?
Absolutely.
So that is a distraction for them. And so what they're actually doing, if you choose to look at it this way, is raising their hand and going, I have an issue. It is creating a distraction because it's making me feel a certain way. It's making me behave a certain way. It's causing emotional, mental, physical strife.
Absolutely.
I need help with this, right? And so I
Absolutely.
think we can look at those as distractions from the other party's side, right? And say like, look, this is really just a call for action and a call for help, and saying like, I can't do this by myself. I can't fix this problem. This isn't a problem with me. This is a problem for me because of these greater socio-political issues, right? And I think that's fantastic. And I think that received that way, it makes the discussion far easier because you can actually look at this as something that will improve company focus, right? So it's not a distraction or a detriment to company focus, but if it's impacting individuals, it's impacting focus. We know this, right? And it will spread. To your point, again, like we can draw some lines, people will cross them, right? You can tell
Right.
people whatever you want. Enforcing that will come with varying degrees of cost.
I think that for a certain number of founders, they'll take everything we just said and also say, I don't care. Right? I mean, to be fair, I
Sure.
just want to be really honest. Like this isn't
Yep.
like everyone agrees with the path we're taking. There are going to be a certain amount of folks.
Yep.
I've talked to some of them that say, "Look,
Yes.
I appreciate people's issues, but just to be clear, I've yet to meet a single founder or anybody in leadership that was like, I don't care about people's personal
Right.
issues or
Correct.
or
Correct.
oppression or
Correct.
anything else. I've yet to see
Yep.
that happen. Right? Although I
Yeah.
think people get labeled that quickly. Uh, but I've seen a staunch group that says, "Look, I get it. People have issues, right? I just don't want that to bring them at work." And I think what's challenging with that is it kind of feels like you're putting your head in the sand, right? To your point about
Sure. Yep.
maternity leave, which at one point didn't exist. Same thing. It's like, yes, have a kid, but pretend that you don't need to ever take care of that kid or like raise them from the moment that you
Yep.
bore them, like as if none of that actually exists, right? Like I don't care.
Yeah.
I just care about work, and I pay you to do a job, not to make babies, right? Like
Yep.
think of like now how absurd that claim sounds. And I
Yes.
don't think if you feel strongly that work is for work, that it's gonna really like not come back to haunt you to understand that that's not entirely true. That the argument
Yeah.
is broken. So,
Yeah.
but beyond that, there's then folks that are saying, okay, work is for work, but I understand that there's other issues, human issues that I need to contend with, and I want to support, etc. These aren't the evil people twisting their mustache with a monocle that you're thinking of, that like down with everybody that isn't a middle aged white male. I just haven't seen that.
Yeah.
That said, Ryan, you talked about the top of the episode. Some folks just aren't aware of it. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When I was 24 years old, and we had a big staff, I was single, I didn't have kids, etc. So I
Sure.
remember when people would go home at like 5 o'clock to
Yeah.
go pick their kids up or watch a soccer game, I was lost on what was
Yeah.
happening.
Why?
Right?
Why would you do that? What's
Yeah,
happening here? What's going
I,
on?
I, I
Yep.
was like, "Hey, Johnson, I guess you're taking an early lunch, right?" Like, I couldn't wrap. I didn't say it, but like, I couldn't wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I didn't have context for it. Right?
Yep.
Now I'm freaking old. Right? I have kids. Right?
Yep.
Like
We get it.
they come before everything. Right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people in positions of power that just don't know, and I'm not letting them all off the hook. What I'm trying
No.
to
No.
say is, it's dangerous to just blanket demonize everybody. You got to understand that like not everybody understands how to address this. Not everybody has the same issues. So, but they're in a
Yep.
position of power that they have to contend with it. And when I say contend,
Yeah.
they have to create policy. They have to create union within the company, and
Yep.
yet they don't have the tools for it. And so I think it's really difficult for a lot of folks to say, "Oh, I'm ready to go. I know exactly what to do." They don't, and that's a challenge.
Yeah. Let me prove exactly how male I am here and use another analogy, sports analogy. If we look at like a boxer, right? They've spent their entire life training boxing up until this point, right? And they're good at boxing, right? They can slip a jab, they've got a good hook, whatever. And all of a sudden you throw an MMA fighter into the ring with them. There's a new set of consequences that they all of a sudden have to deal with, right? And now you can say, man, horrible fighter, right? You can do the same thing with leadership. Leadership's been dealing with a particular set of issues for the last 20 years, 30 years, and that's roughly like the time frame in which management frameworks and things develop. And now all of a sudden, a new set of consequences and a new set of circumstances have been thrown into the mix, and they're not dealing with it well. And you're going, they're bad leadership, right? Doesn't mean they're bad leadership. Doesn't mean they're a bad fighter. It means they don't yet have the set of skills. They haven't been exposed to these consequences and circumstances enough to get it right. And so I think to your point, early and quickly demonizing people, it's a great way to get rid of leadership, right? It's a
Right.
great way to get rid of leadership who maybe made a mistake. But
Right.
if we get rid of leadership at the first mistake, right? Should leadership do the same thing with the first mistakes that their staff makes? Of course not. We would look at that and we would go, that's ludicrous, right?
Right.
Brand new, right? Hired them from the internship program and turned them into our junior social media marketing manager, right?
Right.
And they post something to the wrong channel. You're fired, right? Everybody would go like, what are you doing? Like it was a mistake, right? Now, of course, the bigger the mistake, the greater the consequences, the more public it is, the more likely we are to make those decisions. But if we actually want to solve this, scraping the leadership off the top and saying, let's start fresh, just means you're going to have more junior leadership trying to deal with bigger issues. So I think
Right.
that you run into a whole new set of problems and challenges there. So we need to be really careful about doing that. That said, and you said it, we can't let people off the hook for making bad decisions, but I think
Right.
we need to be careful to make, I don't even want to say the punishment fit the crime, because again, I think crime implies some level of intent and wrongdoing, and I think that by and large, intentions are good. Are there people with bad intentions? Of course, they exist everywhere. However, I don't think that that's the prevailing wind, that people are just trying to maintain systemic oppression or trying to maintain status quo. They may be unintentionally feeding into that. So founders who are saying things like, I just don't care, may be accidentally feeding into that. Maybe they're not. I don't know. I don't have answers to this.
Right.
One of the things I would love is some data around what companies are dealing with this more as we move from, if we look at two ends and we say like, here's a company who's absolutely not diverse in whatever way, and here's a company who's very, very diversified. Which of those two companies actually has more to win or to lose in getting this right? And understand like which one of them are dealing with it more, right? If you
Sure.
have a zero diverse workforce, it's probably, I would assume, far easier just to go, I just don't care about this. It's not really a problem for us,
Right.
right? Yes, and right, you're part of a larger problem, which is that there's no diversity in your workforce. You have the sort of self-imposed blind spot because you're not seeing these issues firsthand. And so, of course, you don't care because anything that's not in your backyard tends to matter less,
Right.
right? So my first question would be like, how much of this are you actually being forced to deal with? How much of this are you seeing? When I say forced, I don't mean forced in a bad way. I mean, like, if one of our people comes to us with an issue, right, we're open door, right? We are absolutely open door. Come talk to us about anything, right? And those are great moments. But if you don't even have somebody who fits the profile to walk through that door and have that conversation, it's not going to happen. And you're missing out. And right, like it's a huge issue. So again, this is all very early, and I'm going to be curious to see where this lands in terms of like how having a more diverse workforce will that create more polarity? Will that create more space for common ground? I would hope that it's the latter, but we're watching this play out in real time, and we'll just see. And something else to note, this feels like a very topical issue, and I actually meant to say this at the top of the episode. This feels very topical, but things like this will continue to come up throughout the life cycle of a startup. It may not be, the topic that we're kind of focusing on right now, but things like this will continue to come out throughout the life cycle of a startup, right? 20, 30 years ago, it was women in the workplace issues, which still aren't fully resolved. I'm not saying like, oh, we can check that box. We're not there yet. However, we've made significantly more progress on that front. But these things will come back around. So this is a very evergreen topic. This is not Will and I leaning on a hot news trend and saying, hey, let's talk about that, because that's not really what we do here, right? We want these things to be important tools for you going forward and carrying you through your entire career as a founder. So felt an important caveat there.
Ryan, I think what ends up happening, though, I think we get frustrated with things bubbling up.
Yep.
And kind of like Jason and David did, they just used the hammer, right? Coinbase did the same thing. They said,
Yep.
No one can talk about these topics in the workplace. And I think let's talk about why, this idea of just oppressing everything is just a broken hammer, right?
Sure.
Something that it's just not effective. It actually doesn't work. And I'm going to argue it's lazy, but I can't account for every single person's situation and why they took that route. I just think in general, it's not the right way to go. Any founder I would ever counsel, I would say that solves nothing, right? For two reasons. This idea that I'm just going to say nobody talks about any of this stuff at work. Here's where it just doesn't work. Number one, you can't tell people what they can't say. Now, you can say where they can't say it. You have some latitude over that, right? But that's not what people hear either, right?
Nope.
What they hear is you're oppressing my free speech, right?
Yep.
In the history of history, especially in this country, that does not end well, right?
Nope.
So there's no version of delivering that message where anybody is going to say, nailed it. That what? A good oppression speech. That's what we needed here. Like, come on.
That's
right?
what we needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And
anytime you create pressure within a system, right? So anytime you draw a box too small, you're immediately creating pressure. And in this case, you're not only creating pressure, you're creating polarity, right? Because if what you're saying is we only allow opinions that are in the middle, that's different than saying we don't allow any opinions at all, right? If we say you can't be, we'll just use the political system, right? You can't be left wing, you can't be right wing. We only allow moderate topics, right? We only allow things that kind of everybody has some stake in. We're not going to let you go polar, right? That creates a ton of pressure. But in this case, where we're saying you're not allowed to talk at all, we're creating that pressure in the system, which invariably boils up and over at some point. And you're creating polarity, which is that there's free speech and then there's fully oppressed speech, and we're going this direction. So we're creating polarity and pressure at the same time. Good luck. Like, this is going to blow up in your fucking face.
It doesn't even make sense, right?
Right.
First off, in today's society, right?
Yeah.
How can you tell people what they can or can't say, right?
You
and
can't.
Again, I
you never have been able to, right?
I don't think anyone who's made one of these policies, that was actually the intent of the policy, that I'm going to curb what you say.
Hope not. Yeah, I would
well,
hope not.
The intent is I'm going to try to curb where you say it, right?
Yeah.
In other words, say whatever you want, just don't use our public chat forums to do it, right? And again, I'm going to get into I'm going to get into where there's some challenges there, but that's also not what people hear, right?
Correct.
When Twitter blew up after the Basecamp announcement, or Coinbase before them, people weren't saying, "Wow, I really hate the forum that people get to talk in," right? They weren't talking about that, right?
No.
What they heard was you are white men telling people of different colors, creeds, genders, etc., that they can't express themselves, right? You are oppressors, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't the intent of the message. That's exactly how it came across, right?
De facto, that was the impact, right? That was actually what they were doing, right? Intended or otherwise, that was the outcome of the policy. It was oppression, right? Can't do that.
Right. Right. So I want to circle that for a second and say, look, any time where you tell people here's what you can't talk about is off the table, right?
Yeah.
We
Yep.
have neither the right to do that or the capability. Like even if we had the right, which we
Correct.
don't, right? Dude, how could you possibly prevent people from talking about what they wanted to talk about, right? Like
You can't.
every social media platform exists, right? Lunch
Yep.
breaks exist,
Lunch
right?
table,
People are gonna
right? The
talk
water
about,
cooler. Well,
oh
used to
my God,
exist.
man, if stuff's bothering people, they are going to talk about it. And they're
Yes.
probably going to talk about it while they're at work, right?
Yep.
So I think it's like, again, it's putting your head in the sand to think that you have some control over what people talk about at work. I think that's
Correct.
bananas, right? Again, I'll take it further. You also just don't even have the right to what people are talking about. But here's where it polarizes the other way, right? Now with the leadership, right? I'm going to take the leadership side. And they're going to say bullshit. It's my company. I set the policies. I determine, what dialogue we're going to have in what forums, right? I'm the one that writes the checks, and therefore, whatever I have to, whatever guidelines I set is what
Right.
people have to either abide by or get out. That is the shittiest, laziest policy I've
Yeah.
ever heard of, right?
Yep.
Because again, it goes back to I don't care, how you feel or what aspect of your lives are enraging you. I just care about work and everything else is off the table. Focus is my
Yeah.
my trump card over everything. It doesn't work, right? It
No.
just doesn't. And look, Coinbase can make a company that makes it work, right? You can force it. It just you're on the wrong side of where this is headed, right? Like you're
Correct.
just moving backward.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you can't pull it off. Yes, you can. Basecamp just did it. The fastest way to
Yeah.
to get rid of this issue is get rid of all the employees with the issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's
Not
it's the
good.
wrong approach. It's the wrong tool.
Yeah, I agree. And so let's boil it down. It comes down to two things. At the end of the day, if we're going to get resolution on this or get closer to it, it's understanding and compromise, right? If we want to
Right.
create that room for both what is needed in the workplace, which is to get work done, but what's needed at the human level in the workplace is things like free speech and clear feelings, no oppression, right? All these things that we also want to achieve for the people in the business. It's compromise, it's understanding. Right? We talk about what an important muscle it is for founders to have and receive empathy. This is one of those cases where we really do have to try to put ourselves in the shoes of not only our staff and our partners, our everybody that's sort of a stakeholder within the organization, but also society at large, right? And it's tough, it's hard, it's difficult. But we have to have that level of compromise and understanding and empathy to be able to even have the forum to create the room for these discussions in the first place.
I think at which point people are so polarized that they say, I hear compromise, I have free speech. There is no compromise on free speech.
Yeah,
That's not what we're
yeah,
talking about,
that's
right?
not what we mean. Yeah,
What we're saying is, look, this person employed you to do something, right? They have
yep.
certain objectives they're trying to get to. Doesn't make them a total asshole. It just means
Nope.
that, like, in their
Makes
mind,
them a
hey, if
business.
you're going to sit at the water cooler and talk about politics for 9 hours straight, at some point they're going to be thinking, well, we should actually probably get some work done at some point as well, right? No matter how strongly
Yeah,
you feel. So this,
we want to be
the
able to refill the
compromise.
water cooler. We kind of have to do that, right?
Listen, man, like the compromise of the understanding is just stepping back, saying, yes, I feel very strongly about these issues. Now tell me what you're trying to get accomplished, right?
Yep.
And most reasonable leadership, founders, what have you, are going to say, look, it's not that I want to press any of your free speech. Again, I've yet to hear a single person say that.
Yeah.
But I need to get shit done, right?
Right.
And some of the stuff you're doing is wildly distracting to folks, right? So how do we give you the voice, the platform you're looking for, but also try to get some of my stuff done as well? And if
Sure.
the employer, staff member or whatever is saying again unilaterally, I don't care what you have to say, that's a shitty stance,
It is.
right? There's a lot of things I want to say and do, but there are certain parameters that are best provided for me to do those things, right?
Sure.
And if I just unilaterally kind of steamroll everyone that has any other feeling, I just don't see that ending well. Again, I think when I say compromise, I just mean two sides understanding what the other side is trying to get done and trying to find a place in between.
Yeah, and optimizing the outcomes on both sides, right?
Right.
We have to remain productive, but let's remain productive in a way that leaves these issues open for discussion. I think that's one of the core things here is that, again, like polarity, we sort of understand creates all kinds of issues, right? Where things just get stretched, right, and things start to tear in the middle, and then there's no room for that compromise, right? But the communication has to exist in the first place. That's the one line of this space that we need to create. Remaining open and understanding is the other one. And again, like to your point, I think it has to come from both sides. It has to be clear that, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I've definitely seen some situations, and this isn't limited to this particular issue, right? Anytime we have these sort of hot issues, topic issues, leadership can treat these as a bit of a, you don't want to end up in a situation where leadership feels like the town is coming after them with pitchforks, right?
Doesn't end
And
well.
you don't want the staff to feel like leadership are the grand oppressors, right? There has to be some level of understanding that there may be things that occur on both sides that are subpar for the others in terms of desired outcomes, right? There may be things that leadership does that don't work as well for the broader team. There may be things that the team does that make things more difficult for leadership. I think what has to happen in the moment where those occur is a bit of empathy and a bit of understanding and a bit of perspective from the other side and saying, here's why they did that. Now, I think it's really dangerous. We've talked about this a couple times in the last few episodes, these one-sided conversations where we're imagining the other half of the combo, right? The one-sided handshake where it's like leadership makes a decision and they believe that just based on the outcomes, going back to that, if this improves focus, this improves productivity, this improves outcomes for the company, that people will sort of understand why we made that decision. Bullshit. It has to be stated clearly. Like, we're doing this, and we understand that this may be perceived in a certain way based on the current context. Here's why we're doing it, right?
Right.
Open that dialogue, right? Same thing. If somebody feels the need to bring up a socio-political issue in a workspace forum, let's just say it appears in the company-wide Slack chat for sake of argument, right? A little bit of why and a little bit of discussion with leadership before somebody does that and starts to use the internal communications as a platform would be much appreciated by leadership in most cases, right? It's not always necessary, right? It's okay to bring up things to talk about with your colleagues. However, if you're going to try to use it as a platform, would probably be better received if it was taken to leadership first so that they can understand why this individual is doing that and what they're hoping to have the impact be from this, right? But at the end of the day, you have to have these channels of communication open because, oppression, silence, just putting your head in the sand, as you've said a couple times in this episode, all lead to really, really bad outcomes, guys.
I also don't think they're necessary, right? For example, again, I
For
think
sure.
people are a little bit lazy sometimes when they're taking either, side of this stance. In other words, if I'm Basecamp in this case, and my
Yep.
issue is that, and they stated in their blog post that a lot of people were getting pulled into these arguments that they just didn't want to be pulled into. They just wanted to be able to have folks on work, whatever, and didn't want to feel like they were complicit, like if they weren't participating, etc. And the truth is, okay, let's create some forums for people that want to have those discussions to have those discussions. Because so we're trying to solve for the fact that not everybody wants to be in those discussions, right? You don't
Yeah,
necessarily have to
for
say
sure.
no one talks about anything, right? Just because some people are pulled in. There's other ways to skin that cat, right? On top of that, you got to figure too, there have to be some parameters, right? In anything where you're like, look, guys, you also do have to work together, right? So if
Correct.
you're showing up every day, gloves off, ready to beat each other to death, that's not healthy, right? There's no version, no matter how much both of you want to express your views, you have to be mindful that at some point you also have to work together, right? Now,
Correct.
now maybe you can't work together, and maybe this
Yeah.
this isn't the environment for you, but let's solve that issue.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is on either side, I don't think that the unilateral anything that's not free speech is oppression is true, and the unilateral on the other side, anything that's not work, is a problem.
Sure.
I don't think either side is essentially true. I also believe that there could be cases where the folks involved just don't have a resolution. Right?
Right.
I don't know that every company has a resolution for every employee. Some people are just dead set on creating so much disruption with no consideration whatsoever for anybody else, that maybe they're just not a good fit for, for that particular organization. They're fit for a better different organization. But I think that's a last resort. Like I think the first thing you do is you sit down and say, what are you trying to accomplish? Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. How do we try to meet both ends or have some compromise in between?